just like life, everything is always shifting and changing. No emotion lasts forever. And even really scary negative thoughts are just passing through.
Thanks for joining us, Mashi.
Thank you, XRA, for having me.
Do you remember when you first began to struggle with your mental and emotional health, and what was that like for you?
I first began to struggle with my mental and emotional health as a adolescent, as a young teenager. That's the first time that I really remember becoming aware of the intricacies and the complications and the wiring that we have as humans, where I was feeling like there were needs that I was having, feelings I was having, thoughts I was having that felt a little bit out of control. And so I remember as a young teenager realizing that, becoming aware of, oh wow, there's a lot going on in the world, and as a teenager you're learning so much about yourself and the world around you, and these are very formative years. And I remember feeling very alone without really knowing even how to express what I was going through, what I was experiencing. Looking back, I I wish that I had had a little bit more guidance during those years, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about spreading education and awareness about the importance of emotional and mental health, especially for young people, because I know that I definitely was not the only person feeling that way. I grew up in a community that was very insular and um, ultra-orthodox religious. And so actually in this community nowadays, there's a lot more awareness and people are getting educated, and it's really great. But even, a few short years ago when I was there, or maybe not a few short years ago anymore, but not too long ago, there was definitely not as much education and awareness as there is now. And so I definitely remember feeling lost, confused, alone, and a little scared. So that was the first little peek that I had into, oh wow, there's so much to take care of aside from our physical bodies, which of course is all intertwined.
Thanks for sharing that. And what specific mental health challenges, just so we can get a better scope of what it is that you were dealing with at that time, if you're willing to share specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember feeling um, slightly depressed, and that led to a 4-year battle with teenage anorexia, which started when I was about 14. That was a very long and arduous recovery process, and that's another one of my passions, to help young people with this, because I know especially for young women, and I mean, and young people all over, this is very common. For me, it stemmed from, among some other things, a feeling of of unworthiness, and of feeling like I didn't belong, and not really knowing how to deal with that. And so I feel like the what manifested as anorexia was really coming from this desire inside of me to starve my emotions because they felt so big, and to starve myself physically came from this desire to starve myself emotionally. So it was kind of a manifestation of that in retrospect. I feel like for many teenagers that are learning to deal with life, that are looking up at the big wide world around them and feeling a little bit lost and insecure and unsure of where they fit in, it can be very overwhelming. And there's being a teenager is difficult under the best of circumstances, and put in any sort of family situation or school situation or social situation, and it just adds even more complications. And so this feeling of wanting to not feel so much, to numb myself out, it felt easier to focus on what I'm eating or not eating rather than focus on what I'm feeling.
That makes sense. And I feel like I've shared this with you before, that when I was younger, especially when I was a competitive figure skater, I dealt with anorexia and I was limiting my eating. And then I realized maybe later in life, as I read and got more educated, that maybe I was limiting my food intake because my household was so tumultuous and anxiety provoking, and I felt very out of control and like I didn't have any control of my environment. So the one thing I could control was what I ate. And so deciding I'm not going to eat this or I'm not going to eat that or spitting out my food was like the one thing I could control. Do
Mm-hmm.
you think that had an aspect for you, especially in your hyper Orthodox religious upbringing where things are so controlled for you? Maybe you felt molded in that this was kind of one thing you could control?
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that that is definitely a big factor in anorexia in general. The desire to control something when it feels like there's not much else to control. So, yeah, that's a great point. I remember feeling like, in the community that I was in at the time, it felt like the my life path was kind of carved out for me, almost like I didn't get to choose it. And so, yeah, like being able to control what I was putting into my body felt like, okay, this is something that I get to choose. So, yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. Why do you feel that teenagers are susceptible to self-harming behaviors?
I feel that teenagers are susceptible to self-harming behaviors because of the factors in their environment, first of all, like the, things that are like they're born into, circumstantial, and also personality wise, right? Like I've studied and researched a little bit about like what makes some teenagers go to abnormal self-harming behaviors while others, although they might be in a similar circumstance, might not. And it's it's not like a simple answer, um, but I do feel that people that are highly sensitive, people that tend to feel deeply, um, in my experience, like highly sensitive people, HSPs, they're more likely to be overwhelmed by their big emotions, and then there's so many factors that might play in, like even like family placement, where they are in the family. For example, I'm the oldest child of six, and looking back, again, this is only things that I realized looking like in retrospect, pieces that I've like pieces of the puzzle that I've clicked together. But looking back, that um, being in that role, uh, like impacted my personality in various ways, like feeling responsible for others, feeling like I wanted to show up in excellence all the time, and leaning a little bit towards perfectionism, right? So all of that has a bearing on like that wanting to be in control. And so I think there's many factors. I think there's definitely like nature and nurture factors that play into why it is that some teenagers will go to these, yeah, self-harming and self-sabotaging behaviors and others won't. And I think it's important in the education system and in the awareness system, like as we're going back and educating young adults, to take that into account and to recognize early on, um, the different tendencies, personality traits, outside circumstances that might um, and young adults that might really benefit from that extra TLC, extra education, extra awareness from the side of the educators.
For sure. I also would wonder about, when you're a teenager, your body's transforming and changing. And there's also so much in play at school with relationships and dynamics and new romances and just, when you're blossoming and going through puberty, it's so much change and that could feel really intimidating and scary. So
Mhm.
maybe this like desire to self harm is a way to cope because when you're so young, we don't yet have those other, healthier coping skills developed yet, unless we have very highly emotionally intelligent parents teaching us how to develop those skills. So in some kind of way, it's like, I'm changing. What can I do? Well, I want to stunt this. I'm not comfortable. I'm not ready yet. I don't feel, you know, safe in my own body while it's changing so quickly. So I wonder in some kind of way if that connects with it. So what helped you recover from anorexia? And do you believe full recovery is possible?
Yeah, I do believe full recovery from anorexia is possible. And I take myself as an example of that because thinking back to those years that were so dark, so challenging for me, for my family, um, and I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel in that at that time. But I'm very grateful to say that through it took a bunch of tries, different treatment centers, different trying many different kinds of treatments. Um, but I'm grateful to say that I totally believe recovery is possible. And what helped me recover, if I had to pinpoint it and like say it in one sentence, it was really a mindset shift and recognizing that we get to be the creators of our own lives. And so there came a point where I think I was about 18. So it'd been like 4 years so far of so much shame, so much darkness and just challenges. And I realized that I was the only one that could change that. It's so simple, right? But it felt so like something shifted in my brain. It was like, well, if I don't want to live this way, then I'm the only one that cannot live that way. And that came along with the realization that I was going to have to let go of what had become a source of solace and comfort and identity. And I think, in my case, it was anorexia. I also went through a period where I struggled with addiction, but I feel like this goes for any sort of addiction, crutch, anything that we turn to for comfort as an escape mechanism from facing our emotions, facing life. It requires letting go of that. And so the first step for me was that realization, and then making the personal decision that I wanted to help myself, as opposed to my parents dragging me to all of these doctors and specialists. This time it came from me, where I made that decision. I don't care what it takes. I want to change. And putting myself in a treatment center and going through that process, right? And I went in with the realization that this was not going to be easy, but then you get there and it's really challenging and you want to give up. And so, really going through that process. And again, it's this goes for so many things in life, like so many addictions, so many journeys of change, of letting go. Change is scary. And so, going through that and learning about what would life be like if I didn't escape all the time, like what am I so scared of, and recognizing that we look to these things. In my case, it was having an eating disorder as like a a best friend, like something to go to when fear would come up, when instead of facing life, it's like, okay, I can go there. And so letting that go, releasing that, and in many ways, it felt like starting from scratch in terms of like who I am, what I like, and going through that process was really life changing. And that it wasn't the only time that I was in treatment center, but that whole journey of unlearning what had been a 4 year challenging experience and then relearning from scratch, like who am I in the world, what do I want. um, in retrospect, I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you for sharing that. I believe you've mentioned to me you've gone to rehab. I'm not sure if you refer to that as a treatment center. Also, what was if you went to rehab aside from a treatment center, what was that like for you, that experience, and were you ever hospitalized?
Yes, good question, because there's over my journey there was many times that I went into a treatment center, quote unquote. After my journey with anorexia, A couple years later, I found myself in another cycle of addiction, this time to substances. Um, and again, I went through a very similar journey, ironically, just with different names and different titles. And but in many ways, it was very similar, and it was a little more condensed, thankfully. But I also had to come to the realization that again, I was finding myself using something to escape, something to get away from myself. And this time it was substances. And so I was never hospitalized. Um, well, for anorexia, yes. I had to be hospitalized at one point, like at the beginning of treatment. Like they put you in like a very hospital like setting before you can enter into the treatment program to make sure that you're medically okay. Um, when it came to substances, since I'd already been through that whole process and had a lot more awareness about myself, um, I realized a lot sooner that I was falling into the same pattern, just with a different addiction. And so, um, again, I came to that realization, hey, I'm the only one that can help myself. I put myself into a drug rehab facility. It was in Arizona. I was there for 30 days, so not that long. But in that 30 days, again, that was enough to um, really shift my life. And I don't think it's necessary to go into these programs in order to recover necessarily. Everybody's different. But for me, that was that was very, very helpful. Um, but more than the act of going into a treatment center, I think it's the mindset shift which I think every individual needs to come to on their own. And I had to come to on my own, like, hey, I am the author of my story. If I don't like this story that I'm writing, I'm the one that can change it, but I'm the only one that can change it. And so this message of empowerment is what inspires me to do what I do today, and bring people together and talk about these things and educate people, because ultimately, it was that realization that saved my life. Like, we can't do it alone, but we also need to do it. No one can do it for us.
Yeah, I so agree with that. And I find it to be, it depending on your worldview of optimistic or pessimistic, it could go either way because it's like, it's up to me. That's so exciting. It's in my control. I am empowered. I am the one who's going to rewrite my story and recarve my destiny. And for maybe a more pessimistic leaning person, it would be, oh my gosh, there's no one who can do it for me. I'm alone. How will I do this? I don't have the ability to do this. I need others to do it for me. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, where do we sit on that spectrum with our worldview? And the more empowered we can be rather than feel defeated by the responsibility.
Mm.
It really is. It is up to us. Like, we can't do it alone, but we have to be the propeller who moves ourselves forward and decides to take action.
Mm-hmm.
Just relating to like the rehab experience, I also did 30 days at rehab for bipolar disorder. And I found it was really hard to find a rehab that wasn't a 12-step program. So it took so much digging. And I hope to see more rehab centers that are specifically for mental health and not just addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because addiction is so co-occurring most often. There's a dual diagnosis with a mental health condition accompanying the addiction. So I think it's so important to be teaching the CBT and DBT inside these rehab centers. That those things really helped me. And then hospital, I too was hospitalized a few times, and it was like the worst, most traumatic experience. So I'd always say, unless you have to be hospitalized, don't go, and go straight to rehab if you can afford it, because it is definitely expensive. But or get really good insurance because it costs money, but it changed my life. So I'm glad it helped you as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's amazing that, some things that are the most effective are what's free. And that just that inner introspection where you came and had that moment of insight of, it's up to me and I want to rewrite my story. And you found that, and whatever led you there, led you there. But really, that's like free, innate knowledge that you derived from your life experiences. So good
Mhm.
on you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I totally agree about the mental health rehabs. I hope to see more of those too. Um, Yeah, the one that I went to was a dual diagnosis, but it was very hard to find. So it's like one of the only ones that I was able to find that, kind of deals with everything: addiction, mental health, co occurring disorders, all kinds of things. But I would love to see more of that.
So let's talk about social media and body image and body shaming. Do you think that social media has an impact on eating disorders?
I feel like it's twofold, right? Like on the one hand, yeah, it can be social media is making a world smaller and smaller. People are in everyone else's business. There can be a lot of pressure, a lot of like, you know, wanting to look a certain way, be like be like that person whose picture is edited like 20 times, right? But then on the other hand, what I am seeing lately is a lot more education and awareness on this subject, which makes me very happy. And different movements encouraging idea that all bodies are beautiful and kind of knocking down these beauty standards that we've created that are unrealistic and just not healthy representations of what humans look like. And so um, my hope is that this continues to rise, and I think it will, and I think it is, as people become more aware of these issues. Because I feel like, with social media, it's there's so many dimensions to it, right? Like it's a tool, so it can be so positive and also so negative. And I know that there's a lot of ways that it's negatively impacting young people and all people. um, but I would like to look at the positive side and feel like, in some ways, as the world's getting smaller, we're almost forced to be more authentic, right? Because like it's easier to know things, right? It's like the if used in the right way, it can make us more connected than ever. And so hopefully that inspires people to be more real about their struggles. And I've seen such a shift in the past recent years, even since I was a teenager, in people's willingness to be vulnerable out in the open, and people's willingness to share about their struggles. Even celebrities you see like setting an example like that. And so um, I definitely think that social media just has an impact on such a large impact in the way that we're living our lives. I'd actually be curious to hear from, a teenager growing up with that, what they feel about that. What do you think about that?
For me, I think that the effects social media can have on our mental health, specifically eating disorders, all comes down to who are we following. And it's really up to us to curate our social media feed. So, for example, if I'm following supermodels with unrealistic body types and I'm following beauty products and anti aging accounts and things like that, I might go on and start judging myself and feel self shame and self doubt and kind of negatively affect my self esteem. Or if I'm following positive body affirming, body positive accounts of average looking people, influencers who promote wellness and well being and self love, and accounts that promote self care, I might go on and feel like I'm in a safe space where I belong and be inspired
Hmm.
and feel healthy and part of that community. So I really think it comes down to like curating the healthiest feed we can by being selective on which accounts we want to follow.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Yeah, because it's all a tool. It's all a tool, and it comes back to us getting to choose.
For sure. Yeah, like because at the end of the day, social media is like choose your adventure of whose life you want to be led into. So who do
Hmm.
you actually feel inspired by, and who actually makes you feel like you're negatively comparing yourself and feeling insecure? And like those are the people to mute or unfollow.
Yes, I love that perspective. It's such a great reminder, rather than think of social media as like this, big uncontrollable thing that is taking over, our minds and our fingers. But to come back to, we have that ability to choose where we're putting our focus, where we're putting our energy, who we're giving our time to, who we're looking up to.
Can you talk a little bit about your journey with depression and anxiety?
Yeah, absolutely. My journey with depression and anxiety has come along with everything that I shared about addiction and anorexia. For me, it was very intertwined with all of that, um, and was part and parcel of these struggles. Um, I've asked myself sometimes, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was I depressed and therefore I developed an eating disorder? Did I have an eating disorder and therefore I developed depression, right? It's like, I'm still not sure, but I do know that depression and anxiety have been a big part of my story. With regards to anxiety, I can actually remember struggling with that from a very young age. Now that I think about it, like as young as like 5 or 6, feeling this pit in my stomach and not knowing what it was. Um, and learning years later that, oh, this has a name. This is called anxiety. Wow. Um, and past through my recovery with anorexia and through my recovery from addiction, I think that anxiety is still something that I struggle with sometimes, and that is so common. Um, I think for me, what has helped me the most throughout is learning about my emotions in general, learning how to love myself through every emotional state. And again, it sounds so, it's so simple, but it's so profound, where we can let ourselves feel it all and have it all be okay. And so my journey recently has been about, accepting that emotions are visitors, just like thoughts, right? And it's probably this realization, if I had to pick one, that has helped me the most throughout my journey of learning to observe, observe my thoughts, observe my feelings, rather than get so entrenched in them. And that goes along with, my yoga brand that I started, um, meditation that I do a lot and that I love to teach, because for me that went hand in hand with that realization, recognizing that no matter what I'm feeling, it's like a cloud in the sky. I am the sky. No matter what negative thoughts are coming into my mind, they're passing through. I get to watch them pass through the screen and observe them without believing them, right? And so, coming from a place of when I was young and didn't have this awareness of, like, I'd believe every thought that my mind fed to me. Every emotion that I felt that was overwhelming, I'd just lean into that and let it take me over. And so really learning that even big emotions, even scary emotions, and even really scary negative thoughts are just passing through. I can watch them, I can observe them, picturing my mind like a computer just generating things, trying to protect me, that those thoughts, maybe um, often having a like having to do with the emotions that come along with them, right? Like the connection between our thoughts and emotions. I'm recognizing that it's all visiting. And so lately, what I've been practicing is when I'm feeling anxiety or any big emotion, sitting still with that, feeling it in my body, and telling myself, hello, anxiety is visiting me right now. Depression is visiting me right now. And recognizing that, just like life, everything is always shifting and changing. No emotion lasts forever. And replacing these negative thoughts, again, recognizing that, yes, our mind is a computer. We don't get to choose maybe the initial first thought that comes, but what we do get to choose is what comes after. It's like a channel. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't like this train of thought. Okay, it popped up, however it got there. Thanks, mind, trying to protect me, doing your best. But I get to now choose to switch the dial and think differently.
I agree. Yeah, it's so important to remember how everything is temporary and impermanence is our best friend, because if something's stressing us out, it's not going to last forever, which just makes the good moments even that more precious since they're also temporary. But I love this idea of a visitor. It's almost like you have a friend over and maybe your friend got annoying and you're like, but I know at 6 o'clock they're going to leave. And so just kind of remembering that this visitor is just a passerby, and it won't stay forever. So I think that's really important to remember. Okay, we're running out of time. So we'll just ask one last question, which is, if there was one message you could leave with people, what would it be?
If there was one message that I could leave people with, it would be what we kind of touched on earlier, that everyone individually is the author of their own story. And you touched on a very important point, that can be a very scary realization as well, right? It's not always, doesn't always feel empowering. Sometimes it can feel like, oh my God, like if it's all up to me, then like, what do I do now? And recognizing too that even that optimism becomes a choice at some point, right? It's like depending on how you look at it. And so you also get to choose the perspective that you take on that idea. And so for myself, recognizing that I'm the author of my story terrified me for many years, which is why I chose addictions. I unconsciously chose to self harm and to self sabotage. But choosing, you know, radical acceptance first, like, hey, this is what I have to work with, this is what I got. This body, these circumstances, this family, this, mind, and recognizing, okay, now I can let this scare me, or I can do my best to let this empower me. And so, recognizing that, yes, we do get to write our story, and yes, that is scary, accepting that fear, like, yeah, it's a big responsibility, and knowing that we're not alone. And I wish that someone would have said that to me at 14 years old, just like tapped me on the shoulder and been like, hey, it's okay. You're not alone, right? Like, it's whatever you're struggling with is okay. And recognizing that we're not alone. And that's the duality of this life, right? Because we're in separate bodies, we're having different experiences, but inside where our experiences aren't really that different, because we all connect on this emotional plane. We all go through the experience of being human and experiencing all these different human emotions. And so as much as we can be there for each other and support each other and let each other know, hey, you're not alone, that in and of itself is so comforting. So that was a long-winded way of saying that we're the authors of our own story, accepting that that is scary, and at the same time, we're not alone in that experience.
I love that, and thanks for the summary. I think it's so cool too when you think of being the author of your own story, because that means your character and the characteristics and personality you have could be ever evolving, and you can wake up every day deciding to be a better, more evolved, developed person of your whoever you want to be, and that could be whether you're positive or negative, whether you choose to fight or fight, whether you choose to date a woman or a man, whether you decide to go be a doctor or be an artist. Like every day you have the choice of deciding who you want to be, and every day the sun rises, you can continue making new choices and never have to live in a fixed identity.
Yes, 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 yes. That is such a great point. Like every moment is brand new. And that's what, I learned from yoga, and that's what I love to teach in yoga. It's like we're so used to predicting our future based on our past, or like deciding what to do moment to moment because this is what we've always done. But recognizing that it doesn't need to be that way, that we have the power to choose moment to moment, is so liberating. And so thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks for joining us here on You, Me, Honestly.